Will had spent years mastering the art of being invisible. Not literally, even though that would have made his life easier, but the kind where people don't really pay attention to him. He was the quiet, bookish librarian who wore oversized sweaters. He was just there. And that was exactly how he wanted it because he was an Omega, the last Omega. Decades ago, Omegas had been declared extinct after a mysterious genetic correction program wiped them out. Society was torn, some alphas celebrated, while others like betas just shrugged because it didn't really affect them. No more weaklings, no more distractions, they had said. Will had spent his entire life ensuring he stayed extinct. Will had been sitting in his apartment, sipping his usual cup of tea when the noise started. There was a crash, then a thud, then someone muttered a cuss word. Will peeked out his window and immediately regretted it. There was a man, broad shoulders, black hair, and lean muscles, standing outside, wrestling with an extra-large couch. A moving truck was parked in front of the building, and boxes were scattered everywhere. Will frowned when he realized the alpha was a new neighbor. New neighbors were bad. New neighbors meant small talk. Small talk meant questions. Questions meant risk. He needed to avoid this man at all costs. And fortunately, Xander had other plans. The next thing Will knew, there was a knock on his door. Will took a deep breath before opening the door. Xander grinned down at him. Hey neighbor. Up close, Xander was intimidating, and even more intimidating when Will realized that he was an alpha. Can I help you? Will asked, keeping his voice neutral. Yeah, actually, I just moved in next door, and I was wondering if you had any duct tape. Duct tape? Xander chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, I broke my couch trying to fit it through the door. Will stared at him, then at the enormous couch still wedged halfway inside Xander's apartment. That's not how furniture works, he said before he could stop himself. Xander grinned wider. I know that now. I don't have duct tape. Damn, do you have anything that could work? Will thought about slamming the door in his face. But instead, he sighed and turned back into his apartment, rummaging through a drawer. After a moment, he held up a roll of packing tape. Xander took it like it was a Christmas present. You're a lifesaver, man. It's fine. So, what's your name? Oh no, that was dangerously close to small talk, but he answered anyways. Will. Cool. I'm Xander. Okay. Will simply nodded. Well, thanks for this, Xander said, holding up the tape. You won. No you don't. Too late, Xander said with a wink before turning back to his apartment. Will shut the door and locked it immediately. Every morning at 8 o'clock, Will leaves his apartment above the library and walks down the stairs to unlock the library doors by 8:05 a.m. It was a routine he follows every weekday. But today, the universe had other plans. As Will stepped out of his apartment, he collided with what felt like a brick wall but was, in fact, Xander's chest. Whoa there, buddy, Xander exclaimed, steadying Will with his hands. Didn't see you coming. Will blinked up at him, still a bit disoriented from what just happened. Sorry. Xander chuckled. It's fine. Where are you off to in such a hurry? The library, Will replied, adjusting his glasses nervously. I work there. Xander's eyes lit up. No way. I'm a huge reader. Maybe you can recommend me something sometime. The last thing Will needed was more interactions with this overly friendly alpha. Sure, he said weakly, even though he so badly wanted to decline. Great, Xander replied, grinning. The next morning, Will was determined to avoid any more unexpected encounters with his new neighbor. He left his apartment 10 minutes earlier than usual this time. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, he breathed a sigh of relief. There was no sign of Xander. Morning, Will. Will nearly jumped out of his skin. He turned to see Xander jogging up to him. You're up early, Xander said, now walking beside him. Will forced a tight-lipped smile. I have work. At the library, right? Mind if I walk with you? Actually, hi. Great, Xander interrupted, not interested in any objections. So, tell me more about yourself, Will. Any family around here? Will clenched his jaw. No. Friends? No. Pets? No. Xander chuckled. Man of few words, huh? I like that. Will quickened his pace, but Xander easily matched it. After a moment of awkward silence, Xander tilted his head, studying Will. You know, Xander began, his tone playful, I can't quite figure you out. There's nothing to figure out, Will replied, keeping his eyes straight ahead. See, that's where you're wrong. Xander's grin widened. Most people around here, I can tell if they're alphas or betas right away. But you, I can't get a read on you. Will's heart skipped a beat. I don't know what you're talking about. Xander leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a teasing whisper. Come on, Will. You're small, quiet, and I can't pick up any scent from you. Are you a beta? Will's mind raced. In a world where omegas were extinct, the safest assumption for him was to be perceived as a beta. But Xander's curiosity was dangerous. Yes, Will lied, hoping his voice sounded convincing. I'm a beta. Xander's eyes sparkled with amusement. A cute beta librarian. Will's face flushed. I have work to do, he muttered, quickening his pace even more. Xander laughed. All right. I'll let you off the hook for now. See you around, neighbor, Xander called after him. Will didn't respond as he reached the library. He slipped inside and closed the door firmly behind him. This was getting out of hand. Xander's curious questions were a threat to the careful life Will had built. He needed to find a way to divert Xander's attention before his secret gets exposed. Later that night, Will sighed as he locked up the library. It had been a long day. He usually closed up at 8 p.m., but an elderly customer had taken forever choosing a book, and Will, being the pushover that he was, had stayed late to help. Now, it was nearing 10 p.m., and the streets were mostly empty as he made his way home. As he turned the corner to his apartment, he nearly jumped when he saw a figure, leaning against the railing outside his building. It was Xander. Will frowned. Why are you here? Xander pushed off the railing, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. Waiting for you. Will's frown deepened. Why? Xander's expression softened. You're out late. Thought something might have happened to you. Will blinked, momentarily caught off guard. I'm a beta, remember? He crossed his arms. I can take care of myself. Xander snorted. Doesn't mean I can't worry a little. Will groaned, walking past him toward the entrance. Don't. I'm fine. Still, Xander followed him up the stairs. You should be careful. It's not exactly safe out here at night. Will sighed, unlocking his door. Good night, Xander. Xander grinned. Sweet dreams, little beta. Will slammed the door shut. This was bad. Alphas weren't supposed to act like that toward betas. They weren't supposed to be protective or hyper-focused on betas, only omegas. Xander's instincts were kicking in, and Will's body was starting to react. As he moved around his apartment, taking a shower and changing into his sleepwear, a strange warmth settled in his stomach and his skin felt sensitive. He brushed it off, but as he sat down with a book, the feeling only worsened. His whole life, he had carefully avoided alphas. He never stayed near them for too long, and even if he did, they don't affect him like this. Something about Xander was messing with Will's body. He grabbed his bottle of suppressants from his bedside drawer and shook out a handful of pills. Normally, he took one every few days to keep himself stable. Tonight, he took 4. Everything would be fine. He just had to keep Xander at a distance. The next day, Will woke up feeling like absolute garbage. His head throbbed and his limbs were heavy. He groaned, rolling onto his side, only for a wave of nausea to hit him so hard he had to scramble out of bed and run toward the bathroom. As he knelt over the toilet, he cursed himself for taking too many suppressants. He had taken them in a panic, desperate to stop the strange warmth in his body, but now he was paying the price. Sweating and dizzy, Will leaned against the bathroom door. There was no way he'd survive a full shift at the library like this. He barely made it back to bed before the next problem hit him. His scent was leaking out. A faint, sweet aroma clung to his sheets. No. His suppressants were supposed to keep this from happening. He forced himself to sit up, and he stumbled to his bedside drawer. He grabbed the bottle of suppressants with trembling hands, spilling more pills onto his palm. He hesitated for a second. His gut told him this was a bad idea, but his fear won. He popped some more suppressants into his mouth and swallowed them dry. It only made things worse. An hour later, he was curled up in bed, his body burning and aching all at once. His heartbeat was erratic, his skin sweaty. His body wasn't meant to handle this much medication at once. And then there was a knock on the door. Will barely reacted at first. He thought he was hallucinating, but the knocking came again, louder this time. Will, his stomach dropped. It was Xander. You in there? I went to the library but you weren't there. I figured I'd check on you. Will gritted his teeth, forcing himself to sit up. Why is he so damn persistent? He dragged himself toward the door, every step making his head pound. Will, if you don't answer, I'm gonna. I'm fine, Will croaked out, gripping the doorknob to steady himself. His voice sounded weak, even as he tried to sound firm. Xander went silent for a moment. Then, in a softer tone he said, "You don't sound fine." Will squeezed his eyes shut. He could not let Xander in. Not when his scent was leaking, not when he was barely holding himself together. "I'm just sick," he forced out. "Nothing serious. Just need rest." Another pause. Then, Xander sighed. "All right, but if you need anything, I'm next door, okay?" Will didn't respond. He just waited until he heard the sound of retreating footsteps. As soon as Xander was gone, Will walked slowly back in bed, curling up. He had to get himself under control. The next day, Will woke up feeling fine. Not perfect, not normal, but better. His fever had eased. He didn't feel nauseous. And for the first time in 24 hours, he didn't feel like death was lurking around the corner. Still, he decided to stay in. His body had been through too much, and he wasn't going to risk collapsing in the middle of the library just because he was feeling a little better. So, he spent the morning eating a large breakfast as he hadn't eaten in a long time. That afternoon, he was bundled in a blanket, reading in silence, sipping weak tea, and most importantly trying to pretend he hadn't nearly exposed himself to his nosy alpha neighbor the night before. But just a few hours later, something changed. It started as a low heat in his stomach. He assumed it was just the aftermath of his suppressant overdose again, but then it grew. The warmth turned into a slow burn. His skin felt too hot and his breathing grew heavier. Will's eyes widened in horror. His scent was leaking. No, pouring out of him, thick and heavy. He staggered toward his bedside drawer, hands fumbling for his suppressants. Then the first alpha howl echoed through the building. Will froze. Another howl. Then another. Then, the unmistakable sound of multiple pairs of footsteps thundering down the hall. His blood ran cold. The alphas. They smelled him. Panicked, he grabbed the bottle of suppressants and popped off the cap. But his hands were shaking so badly that the pills spilled everywhere. He barely had time to gather them back in the bottle before his door slammed open. It was Xander. He looked nothing like the laid-back flirt Will had met days ago. His eyes were dark and his breath heavy as he scanned Will. Then he releases a loud deep growl. It was a warning, because just behind him, other alphas had gathered in the hallway, drawn in by Will's scent. Their eyes were filled with hunger, their instincts screaming at them to push past Xander and claim the Omega inside. But before a single alpha could step forward, Xander turned his head slightly and growled again. "Back off." It was a command. The air grew thick with tension as some alphas hesitated, caught between their instincts and the dominant presence in front of them, Xander. They clenched their fists, considering to ignore the warning. But Xander took a single step forward, with gaze intense and shoulders squared like he was ready to tear apart anyone who so much as breathed wrong. That was all it took. One by one, the alphas backed away, some with reluctance, some cursing under their breath, but none of them dared to challenge Xander directly. When the last one disappeared down the hall, Xander slammed the door shut and locked it. Then, finally, he turned back to Will. His expression softened just slightly, but his voice was still rough when he spoke. "You have 3 seconds to tell me what the hell is going on." Will could barely think as he swallowed hard, breath coming out in short gasps. Xander took a slow step closer, watching him carefully. "Will," he said, lower this time, more gentle. Will squeezed his eyes shut. "I can explain." Then his legs finally gave out. Xander caught Will before he hit the ground. Xander could feel the heat rolling off him in thick waves. It was no wonder every alpha in the damn building had come running. But none of them had any idea what Xander had just figured out. "You're not a beta, you're an Omega," he said, his voice low, disbelief written all over his face. "The last one." Will's shoulders slumped, realizing that Xander had figured it out, but he didn't deny it. Xander's grip tightened. "Do you have any idea how dangerous this is?" His voice rose a bit with anger. "How the hell are you alive?" Will's body trembling against Xander. His voice weak. My parents were Omegas too. They were taken by the government. They tried to save me. Gave me to an alpha family to hide me. They knew if the government found out I existed, they'd... Will cut himself short, not wanting to finish the sentence. Xander stared at him, his mind racing. Omegas weren't extinct. They were wiped out. His grip on Will's waist tightened. That's why they banned research, he muttered, realization sinking in. They didn't want anyone knowing they were responsible for the Omega's disappearance. Will let out a weak laugh. I've spent my whole life hiding. Taking suppressants until I can't think straight. His fingers tightened around Xander's sleeve. And now I've ruined everything. Xander's jaw clenched. No, he said firmly. You didn't ruin anything. Will looked up at him with confusion. You were surviving. He met Will's gaze, deadly serious. And now, I'm going to make sure you keep surviving. Exhaustion finally overtook Will and his eyes fluttered shut, body going limp in Xander's arms. Xander cursed under his breath. He needed to get Will somewhere safe. The suppressants had failed. His heat was in full swing, and the whole damn building was filled with alphas who had caught his scent. Xander glanced at the locked door knowing that the alphas will be back. And if they found out what Will really was, Xander wasn't sure if he could keep them all away. Xander carried Will to the couch, setting him down gently. But the second he let go, Will let out a whimper and immediately reached for him again. Xander froze as Will's fingers tugged at Xander's shirt, his scent hitting Xander full force. Xander swallowed hard. Shit. Will was completely out of it. Suppressants couldn't stop a full-blown heat, and now his instincts were kicking in hard. Xander dragged a hand down his face. You're not making this easy, you know that. Will's eyes fluttered open, looking like a needy Omega. Xander nearly lost his damn mind. He inhaled sharply and ripped himself away. I need to call someone now, he said, his voice strained. Xander took his phone out of his pocket and called Elias, the beta doctor who had treated Xander a few times in the past. If there was anyone who could help, it was him. Xander, you never call me. What did you do this time? Please listen. Xander's voice was serious. I have an Omega here, a real one. He's in heat. There was silence for some time before the beta spoke up. What did you just say? You heard me. Xander glanced at Will, who was still squirming on the couch. I need to know how to help him fast. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. Xander, if you're telling the truth, you have no idea what kind of shitstorm you just walked into. I don't care. Just tell me what to do. Send me your address now. Xander didn't hesitate. He sent the location and hung up, pacing the room like a caged animal. Will was still curled up on the couch, trembling, his scent wrapping around Xander like a damn noose. Xander clenched his fists. Stay in control, he told himself as he stepped farther away from Will. 15 minutes later, a rapid knock sounded at the door. Xander yanked it open and Elias stood there, looking more pissed off than usual. He shoved past Xander, carrying a black medical bag, and the moment he stepped inside, his face twisted in shock. Holy shit, you weren't lying, Elias muttered. An actual Omega. Yeah, no shit. Now do something? Elias snapped out of it and walked over to Will, kneeling beside him. He checked Will's pulse, pressed the back of his hand against Will's forehead, then cursed under his breath. He's burning up, Elias said. How much suppressant did he take? A lot. Elias shot him a glare. How much is a lot, Xander? Enough to make himself sick. Elias swore under his breath. Suppressants don't work like that. Too much shuts down an Omega's natural regulation system. His body is rejecting it and forcing the heat to hit harder to make up for it. Yeah, I figured, Xander muttered. Elias ignored him, turning back to Will. Hey kid, can you hear me? Will let out a small, shaky breath. Yeah. Okay, that's good, Elias murmured. You'll be okay. Xander watched closely as Elias loaded a syringe. What's that? Xander asked. A temporary stabilizer. It won't stop the heat, but it'll make it manageable until his body evens out. Elias rolled up Will's sleeve and carefully injected the medicine. Will flinched slightly, but after a few seconds, his body relaxed and his breathing became steadier. Xander let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Elias leaned back, watching Will carefully. He needs rest. No more suppressants, no more stress. Just let his body work through the rest naturally. Xander nodded. Is he gonna be okay? Elias turned to him, expression serious. Physically. Yeah. But Xander, do you have any idea what this means? Yeah? It means he's in danger. That's the understatement of the century. He glanced at Will again, then lowered his voice. We need to talk privately. Xander and Elias moved to the living room after placing Will on the bed in his bedroom, leaving him to rest. You need to listen to me carefully, Elias said after they got to the living room. Because what I'm about to tell you, it changes everything. Xander tensed. What is it? Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. I think Will's parents, they weren't just ordinary Omegas. They were part of the last known Omega resistance before the government wiped them out. Xander's blood ran cold. How do you know that? Elias continued. Omegas were hunted down by the government quietly. They erased every trace of Omega existence, any research, any medical files. I was one of the people given the job to erase medical files. I didn't know what was going on at the time, but I memorized the faces of the couple labeled as special on the file. They were part of the few groups that fought back, trying to expose the truth. Will's parents were part of that movement. Xander's jaw clenched. Then how did he survive? Someone probably smuggled him out, Elias said. I don't know who, but they must have given him to a beta or alpha family to raise, because there's no way an unclaimed Omega child would have made it past infancy otherwise. Xander thought about Will's words from earlier. His parents tried to save him. They knew they wouldn't make it, but they made sure their son did. Elias leaned forward. If the government finds out Will is alive, they'll do whatever it takes to get rid of him. He's living proof that Omegas were murdered. Xander's fists tightened. Then we don't let them find out. Elias nodded. Good, because right now, we have a bigger problem. Xander frowned. What now? Elias jerked his chin toward the door. The other alphas in this building. You think they don't smell Will's scent? If we don't cover this up fast, people are going to start asking questions. Elias grabbed his medical bag and pulled out a small bottle. This is a concentrated pheromone spray. It's used in scent therapy clinics. If anyone asks, we tell them this was the cause of the smell. An experiment gone wrong. That should be enough to throw them off. Xander took the bottle, studying it. And if they don't believe us, Elias shrugged. Then we act like we have no idea what they're talking about. Xander nodded. Just as he said that, there was a loud knock. Elias and Xander exchanged glances before Xander yanked the door open, only to find 3 alphas from the building standing there, looking suspicious as hell. The tallest one, a guy named Darren, narrowed his eyes. What's that smell coming from this apartment? It smells like an Omega in heat. The 2 other alphas behind him murmured in agreement. Yeah, it was strong. Damn near knocked me out. Xander put on his best and bothered face. Oh that. He held up the bottle. Medical-grade pheromone spray. Elias was testing it for a project. The formula was off, so it got a little out of hand. Elias stepped up, rolling his eyes. A little is an understatement. Almost gave me a migraine. Darren frowned. Pheromone spray. Elias sighed dramatically. Yes, and trust me, if it were an actual Omega scent, you'd know. You wouldn't be standing here all calm and collected. Darren hesitated. I mean, that's true. Xander smirked. Exactly. So, if you're done being nosy, we'd love to go back to our experiment. The 3 alphas still looked suspicious, but Darren finally grunted. Fine. Just warn people next time. Xander rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure. They left, still muttering, and Xander shut the door. Elias raised an eyebrow. Not bad. Xander smirked. I'm a great liar. Will woke up feeling a bit better than he felt before as his heat has decreased. He slowly sat up, wincing as he moved. He could hear muffled voices through the thin walls. We can't keep him here, Xander. The cover-up worked for now, but what happens when someone starts asking more questions? When someone realizes it wasn't just some pheromone spray. Will frowned. Cover-up, spray. Then it clicked. They were talking about him. They were talking about the fact that every alpha in the building had noticed his heat. His heart kicked up as he forced himself to walk quietly toward the door. We need to get him out of here, Xander said, sounding firm. And where exactly do you plan to take him? Elias shot back. Anywhere but here. Will's stomach twisted. They wanted him to leave. No, absolutely not. He shoved the door open and stepped into the room. I'm not going anywhere. Both men turned to him. Xander's eyes immediately darkened, scanning Will, checking if he was fine. You should be resting. Will ignored that. I heard everything. You don't need to move me anywhere. The alphas believe the story, right? He glanced at Elias. You said it yourself. They think it was just a pheromone spray gone wrong. Elias hesitated. For now. Then what's the problem? I'm safe. Will crossed his arms. Xander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Safe. His voice was low and dangerous. Will, you're the last Omega alive. If anyone finds out what you really are, do you have any idea what will happen to you? Will lifted his chin. I know how to take care of myself. Xander's eyes darkened, and before Will could react, Xander took a step forward, and Will instinctively backed up. Xander didn't stop until Will's back hit the wall. Xander towered over him. He had one hand beside Will's head, effectively caging him in. You think you can handle this? Alphas would tear each other apart just for a chance to get near you. And you want to stay here, in an apartment building full of them. Will swallowed, throat dry. Xander was too close. His alpha scent driving Will to the brink of crazy because of his faint heat. He knew Xander wasn't trying to intimidate him, but holy hell, it was working. Will forced himself to glare up at him. I didn't ask for this, you know, he snapped. I've spent my whole life hiding, and I've done just fine until you showed up. Xander's jaw twitched. Oh yeah, that's why you nearly killed yourself with suppressants. That's why you just went into heat so hard it nearly exposed you to every alpha in the damn city. Will pressed his lips together, refusing to let his face betray how he felt being this close to Xander. Then, from across the room, Elias rolled his eyes. Oh, for fuck's sake, he said, making both of them freeze. Will turned his head just in time to see Elias sighing dramatically. The tension in this room is suffocating me, so I'm taking my leave before you to start making out against the damn wall. Will's face was redder than ever, and Xander awkwardly coughed. Elias grabbed his bag, shaking his head as he walked to the door. Handle your Omega problems, Xander. I'll be seeing myself out. He yanked the door open, stepping into the hallway. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. Then he shut the door behind him. Xander still had Will pinned against the wall, but neither of them spoke. Then, after some moment, Will whispered in a small voice, "Move." Xander's finally exhaled and stepped back. Will crossed his arms then. We're not talking about this. Xander clenched his jaw. Yeah, we are. Not right now. Xander opened his mouth, then shut it. Fine. Will was determined to prove a point. He didn't need anyone's protection. Not Xander's, not Elias's. No one's. For 24 years, he had hidden what he was. He had survived alone, keeping his secret buried so deep that even he sometimes forgot. So, he refused to accept that one small mistake suddenly meant he had to be babysat. The next morning, despite Xander's obvious disapproval, Will left the apartment like nothing had happened. He didn't miss the way Xander watched him leave with arms crossed and a disapproving look. You sure you're good? Xander asked for the 10th time. Completely fine, Will replied, shoving his hands into his pockets. Betas don't need bodyguards, remember. Except you're not a beta, Xander wanted to say, but Will already left. At first, everything was normal with Will. The library was how it had always been. No one knew. Everything was fine. Until it wasn't. It started slowly. Will started noticing a few more alphas than usual. A few more stares. Then, at some point, a beta coworker casually mentioned, "It's weird how all these alphas have been stopping by the library today. I swear, I've never seen this many in one place." Will forced himself to chuckle. Yeah, weird. But he knew why. His heat had faded, but maybe it was still lingering enough that some alphas were catching on. He realized his stupid, stubborn decision to go out in public had been the worst idea ever. He suddenly felt someone watching him. Will turned his head to look across the library to see two alphas in casual conversation. Except they weren't casually talking. They were staring at him like they knew. Like they sensed something. Shit. He had to leave now. He forced himself to move, grabbing the nearest book and tucking it under his arm in an attempt to look casual. He walked not too fast, not too slow, just normal. He felt their eyes on him the whole way. The second he stepped into the break room, He pulled out his phone to text Xander. "Hey, Xander, I fucked up, and if you say I told you so, I'm going to kill you." Xander replied almost immediately. "Where are you?" "Will, library break room." Xander, "On my way. Stay there." Will locked his phone and took a shaky breath. His pride really didn't want to admit it, but for the first time in a long time he was scared. 5 minutes later, Xander stormed into the break room. "You idiot," were the first words out of his mouth. Xander grabbed Will's wrist and yanked him to his feet. "We're leaving." Will was about to complain, but he noticed that Xander looked pissed, so he just shut his mouth and followed him back to the apartment. The moment they got back to the apartment, Xander didn't even hesitate. He stormed inside, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing Will's things. Will blinked. "What the hell are you doing?" Xander didn't even look at him. "You're moving." Will's eyes widened. "Excuse me." "You're moving," Xander repeated, shoving more clothes into a bag. "Now." Will rushed forward, trying to snatch the clothes back out. "Hold the hell up, I never agreed to this." Xander shot him a deadly glare. "You lost the right to argue when you almost got caught." Will frowned. Almost. Almost isn't caught, dumbass." Xander exhaled sharply. "You're leaving," he said again, this time slower. "I already found a place. It's safer. No nosy alphas. No risks. I already moved my things to because I had a suspicion something like this would happen." Will froze. "Wait, what?" Xander didn't stop packing. "I said, I already moved." "You're moving too." Xander glanced at him, annoyed. Obviously. Will opened his mouth, closed it, then rubbed his face. "Unbelievable. You're welcome. This is kidnapping. This is saving your life. Stop being reckless and maybe I'll stop treating you like a rescue mission." Will frowned. "I hate this." Yeah, Xander drawled, already heading for the door. "Come on, Omega. Time to go." Will groaned, but deep down he knew there was no point in fighting. So, he followed. The ride to the new apartment was silent. Will sat with his arms crossed, staring out the window, but his mind wasn't on the scenery. It was on the fact that it was his own stupidity that led him here. He had messed up. He had been so sure he could handle things on his own. He had been reckless. And now Xander had to clean up his mess. Will sighed, slumping a little in his seat. "I was stupid." Xander, who had been focused on driving, glanced at him. "What?" "I was stupid," he muttered, voice small. "Going out like that. It was dumb. I thought I had it under control, but I didn't. I could have gotten caught. Or worse." Xander didn't say anything. "I just feel so dumb. You had to drop everything because of me. You barely even know me, and you're already doing so much." Xander sighed and pulled the car to the side of the road. He then turned to Will. "Yeah, you were stupid," he said bluntly. Will let out a miserable groan and covered his face. "I know. But," Xander cut him off, "you were scared. And people do dumb things when they're scared." Will peeked at him through his fingers. "That's not really making me feel better." Xander gave a small laugh. "What I'm saying is, you're not alone in this anymore. So stop acting like you have to handle everything by yourself." Will's gaze settled on Xander. "But why?" he asked quietly. "Why are you doing all of this? You barely know me. You just met me a few days ago, and now you're throwing your whole life aside for me." Xander's cheeks got a bit red at Will's intense stare. "I don't know," he shrugged. "I just feel drawn to you. I feel the need to protect you. Like it's not even a choice." Will swallowed hard at that statement. Xander turned to him fully then, eyes locked onto his. "You're not a burden, Will. You're not ruining my life. You're not alone." Will's chest tightened. He had spent years making sure he was alone, making sure no one got too close. Because if no one got close, no one could leave. No one could hurt him. But Xander wasn't leaving. No matter how much Will pushed, no matter how difficult he was, Xander stayed. "Thanks," Will mumbled, voice barely above a whisper. Xander nodded, then reached over and ruffled Will's hair. "You're an idiot, but you're my idiot now, so don't pull that reckless shit again." Will huffed, slapping his hand away. "I hate you." "Sure you do." And with that, Xander pulled the car back onto the road, leaving Will sitting there, heart pounding, and sure what the hell had just happened to him. Xander's new apartment was in a much better part of town. The neighborhood was quieter, and most importantly there were fewer alphas. As the days passed, Will started to need not just grateful but safe around Xander. His stomach flipped whenever Xander leaned too close. His heart raced whenever Xander ruffled his hair. He was an Omega and Xander was an Alpha. He couldn't afford to develop feelings. He shoved those thoughts deep down and pretended they didn't exist. While Will was adjusting to his new life, someone else had not been so easily fooled. One of the alphas from his old building, a man named Grayson, had never quite believed the pheromone spray excuse. He had noticed something off about Will from the beginning. No pheromone spray in existence could have made an alpha that desperate. So, out of suspicion, he had reported it. And now, the government was watching. One night, Will was curled up on the couch, reading a book, while Xander sat beside him also reading a recommended book from Will. Then suddenly there was a loud crash. The front door was kicked open. Will jolted upright, heart racing. Xander was on his feet in an instant, a deep growl ripping from his throat. Men in black uniforms stormed inside, their faces concealed by helmets. Will recognized those uniforms. The government. Panic shot through him as he immediately tried to run, but someone grabbed him. No, he yelled, struggling, but the grip on him was tight. Xander moved so fast. He punched the first man in the face so hard that he fell to the floor. The second man barely had time to react before Xander grabbed him and threw him into the wall. The third man pressed a gun to Will's head and Xander froze. "Let him go," Xander growled. The man smirked. "Funny, we were about to say the same thing to you." Xander's body tensed as his eyes locked onto the gun pressed against Will's head. The agent smirked, pressing the barrel harder against Will's temple. "Now, be a good alpha and step aside." Xander's mind raced. Fighting was too risky. One wrong move and the agent could pull the trigger. He refused to let that happen. Instead, he raised his hand slightly in a gesture of surrender. "All right," he said smoothly. "Let's all take a deep breath. No one has to get hurt." The agent chuckled darkly. Too late for that. Xander took a slow step forward and the agent tensed, his grip on Will tightening. Xander knew at that moment that the agent was bluffing about pulling the trigger. With fast reflexes, Xander kicked the coffee table toward the agent's legs. It wasn't much painful, but it was a distraction. The agent stumbled slightly, his balance wavering for just a second. And a second was what Will needed to slam his foot down on the agents with all his strength. The man groaned in pain, his grip loosening, and Will snatched himself free from the agent. Xander moved instantly. Before the agent could react, Xander grabbed him by the collar and flung him straight into the officer on the ground that was beginning to get up, sending them both crashing into the wall. Xander turned to Will, scanning him quickly, to make sure he wasn't injured. "I'm fine," Will panted, though his legs felt like jelly. "Good. We need to go." Will nodded, and they immediately started running out of the apartment. Xander's heart pounded as he and Will got into his car. He drove above the speed limit. It was a bit past midnight, so the street was mostly empty. The government knew now. Everyone would know soon. By the time they reached Alias's home, a small, tucked-away townhouse on the outskirts of the city, Will's legs were shaking from fear. Xander banged on the door. "Alias, open up." A moment later, the door swung open, revealing a very tired, very annoyed-looking doctor in a bathrobe and bunny slippers. Alias blinked. "Do you ever show up at reasonable hours?" Xander pushed past him. "Not the time." Will stumbled in behind him and Alias shut the door and gave them both a look. "All right. What the hell did you two idiots do now?" Xander ran a hand through his hair. "The government attacked us." Alias sighed dramatically. "Well, who could have seen that coming?" Will ignored them both, pacing the living room. His mind was racing. They couldn't run forever. Even if Xander found another safe house, it wouldn't matter. The government would keep hunting them down. This had to end. And there was only one way to do that. "I'm making a video," Will announced. Xander turned to him sharply. "What?" Will clenched his fists. "I'm exposing them." Xander's eyes twitched. "Will, no, listen to me." Will spun around, determination burning in his gaze. "They're hunting me because I'm the last Omega, right? Well, what if I tell the world? What if I tell everyone what they did? What if I tell them that Omegas still exist and the government has been lying for years?" Xander gaped at him like he had just suggested jumping off a cliff. Alias, however, just sipped his tea. "You, Brahma." Xander turned on him. "Don't encourage this." Will crossed his arms. I'm doing it. Xander let out a growl of frustration. Will, you just barely escaped with your life. You really think putting your face in front of every single screen in the country is a good idea? Yes, Will said firmly, because I'm done hiding. Xander ran a hand down his face. This is insane and stupid. Maybe. Will's expression softened. But you've done so much for me, Xander, even though we just met. You've been risking everything for me. I don't get it. Why? Xander's jaw clenched and ran a hand through his hair. Because I want to protect you, okay? Will blinked, a weird fluttering sensation filling his chest. And I really. Here's a camera. Elias cut him off, handing Will his phone. A few hours later, Will sat in front of the camera. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady. My name is Will, he began, and I am an Omega. Silence. Then, he took a deep breath and continued. The government has been lying to you. Omegas aren't extinct, they've been hunted. I am living proof of that. He spoke about his parents, about how they were killed for being Omegas. He talked about how he had to hide for his entire life, how he had been terrified to exist. Then, he looked straight into the camera. I know there are others out there. I know I'm not the only one. And I want you to know that you don't have to hide anymore. Alias grinned. Damn. Xander groaned. I hate this plan. Alias hit the upload button. Within minutes, the video went viral. Betas flooded the comments, expressing outrage at the government. Some alphas did too. That evening, there was another post going viral on TikTok. It was a beta woman holding up a sign outside the government building that read, "Let Omegas live." Her video spread like wildfire and soon, others joined in. Within hours, hundreds to thousands of betas and alphas took to the streets, demanding justice. They held banners that read, "The government lead. We stand with Omegas. Where are the Omegas?" Will wanted to go out, but Xander reminded him how stupid it was to join the protest. So they all sat on Alias's couch, watching the news in stunned silence. Holy shit, Alias muttered, shoving popcorn into his mouth. You broke the world. Xander didn't know if this was good. Too many people were watching now. Too many eyes on Will. This is bad, Xander said. Will turned to him. Bad? People are supporting us. Yeah, they're putting a giant target on your back, Xander snapped. The government isn't just going to sit back and let this happen. Alias hummed. He's not wrong. Will exhaled. So what do? We need to keep you hidden. Will's stomach twisted. No. Xander lifted his head. No. Will stood, hands clenching into fists. I'm done hiding. If people are fighting for us, then I need to fight too. Xander tried to intervene but was cut off. Xander, please. Will's voice softened. You've been protecting me this whole time. Let me protect myself too. Xander's jaw tightened. Alias leaned forward. Sue, what's the plan then? Will turned back to the screen, watching as thousands of people marched through the city. The protest is already happening, he said. Now we just have to make sure it works. The protests grew louder, and by the next morning, cities all over the country were in chaos. Betas and alphas marched together, holding signs that condemned the government's actions. Social media was flooded with stories from families who had lost their Omega loved ones. Stories that had been buried under government propaganda for years. Some Omegas, who had spent their entire lives in hiding, slowly started coming forward. They weren't just one or two. There were dozens, scattered across the country, living in secrecy out of fear for their lives. But the government wasn't going to give up that easily. They had spent decades erasing Omegas from history. They weren't about to let a single protest change that. That was why, on the fourth day of the protests, they made their move. During the protests, late at night, and marked black vans began patrolling the streets, tasked with one mission: capture and detain any Omega who revealed themselves. Will and Xander were watching a live feed of the protests when the news broke. A shaky video showed soldiers dragging a young Omega into a van while onlookers screamed. The Omega was fighting, but they were no match for the trained guards. The video cut off suddenly, and the broadcast station went offline. Will's stomach turned. No. Xander clenched his fists. Shit. Alias threw his hands up. Oh great. They're not even pretending anymore. Xander was already on his feet. We need to move. If they find out where we are, they'll come for Will next. Will's breath was shaky. They're going to take everyone. The video spread all over social media and protesters shifted tactics. They didn't just march anymore, they fought back. When government forces tried to grab an Omega, betas and alphas blocked the way, forming protective walls around them. The government had power, but the people had numbers. It became impossible to take the Omegas without causing mass violence. At one point, an alpha was caught on camera punching a soldier in the face for trying to drag away an Omega child. The footage went viral, sparking even more public outrage. By the end of the first week, the government's plan had failed. They had underestimated the people. The protests didn't stop. Even after the government backed off, the people kept marching. On day 6, the journalist leaked classified documents, proving the government had deliberately targeted and eradicated Omegas. On day 7, the officials responsible for the Omega eradication were arrested. The country watched as the faces of the people who had nearly wiped out Omegas were broadcasted on live television. Many of them were high-ranking officials who had spent years covering up the truth. Omegas were allowed to come out of hiding. For the first time in years, they could live freely. A week has passed since then. Will and Xander stood on the rooftop of Elias's house, looking down at the city below. Fires from the protests had died down, and the streets weren't filled with chaos anymore. Xander leaned against the railing beside him. "You did it." Will let out a breathless laugh. "We did it." Elias popped his head up from the doorway. "And I want credit for housing the most wanted Omega in the country." Xander rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure, Elias. You're a hero." Will smiled. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he had to hide. He was free. And so were all other Omegas. 6 months later, it had been 6 months since the protest, and since Omegas were allowed to live openly again. Some were still hesitant, but many had stepped into the light, no longer forced to pretend they were something they weren't. They stayed at Elias's house for a while, but eventually, Xander dragged Will away. Not forcefully, but in a way that left no room for argument. "We need a real home, Will," Xander had said, arms crossed. "Not a guest room in a house that smells like a hospital." Elias had dramatically clutched his chest. "I am a gracious host. You eat all my snacks," Will had deadpanned. Fair point. That was how they ended up here, on the balcony of their shared apartment. They are staying together due to Xander's urge to protect Will. Xander stood beside Will, arms resting on the railing. "You've been quiet tonight. What are you thinking about?" Will hesitated a bit before he finally spoke. "Why are you still here?" Will looked down, voice quieter. "The world is different now. Omegas don't need protection anymore." "I don't need protection anymore, but you're still here." Xander sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You really are so dense." Will frowned. "Excuse me." Xander turned fully, stepping closer. "I'm still here because I want to be, Will." Will swallowed. "Why?" Xander reached out, cupping his chin and tilting his head up. His voice was softer now, more serious. "Because I love you, idiot." Will's eyes widened. His heart skipped a beat. Xander sighed. "I don't care if you're an Omega, a beta, or a freaking alien. I like you. You drive me crazy, but I'd rather be insane with you than sane without you." Will stared at him. Then, before he could stop himself, he blurted, "You are so bad at confessing." Xander blinked. "Excuse me." Will grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him into a kiss. Xander made a noise of surprise before quickly melting into it, hands sliding around Will's waist, holding him close. The kiss was slow, deep, filled with everything they had never said out loud. When they finally pulled apart, Will was breathless. His face was flushed. "I love you too," he admitted softly. Xander's lips curled into a smug grin. "I knew it." Will smacked his chest. "Oh, shut up." Xander laughed, wrapping an arm around his waist and pulling him into his chest. "You're stuck with me now." Will sighed, but there was a smile on his lips. "Yeah," he murmured, resting his head against Xander's shoulder. "And I don't mind." The end.